Neen and Heather so far. Neen and Heather. Yeah. Yeah. So we'll let we'll fortunately it's gonna make. Hi, everyone. Just checking in very quickly. We're about to get started. And if you would like tea or coffee, this is the last call. So if you haven't got a refresh, now is your time because the folks in the kitchen are going to be closing up the doors. So if you'd like to try to grab a quick refill, now is the time. And if you're online, this is also a good time to maybe think about doing anything. Heather's got her glass of water. Excellent. And Neen looks like she's really ready and engaged for a presentation. So we'll just be a couple more minutes and then we'll get started. Thanks. Hi, everyone. Just while we're taking a moment to settle in, I just thought I would take this opportunity to welcome our online folks who are joining us and participating and watching the presentation. And we have the unique experience of having people across Canada. We've got Heather, who's in Alberta, Calgary, and Neen, who's outside of Ontario. And we really look forward to, and we have Kathy, who's just put in the chat, hello, everyone. Hi, Kathy. And we may have a couple of more folks joining us later too. And just to let you know also that we're recording this presentation. So if at any time you'd like to take it in or share it with someone or review, there's definitely an opportunity to do that. And so I think it looks like folks are just about ready in the hall, but I thought I would just extend that greeting and welcome to everybody who is tuning in virtually and will join in with our folks who are here at the church.
Thanks, Erin. I think we will get started now. So thank you to all of you who are joining with us today to engage with this presentation. I'd like to take a moment to welcome Ainsley Chapman. Ainsley is the Executive Director of Evangel Hall Mission. Evangel Hall recently merged with Portland Place as well, so you might be aware of that name. And Ainsley's been serving in this role for 8 years now, and she's become somewhat of an expert in housing and helping those who are experiencing homelessness, folks who are vulnerable in a variety of different ways in our city through housing and specific programming that helps with that. So we'll hear a little bit about Evangel Hall and what they do, but also just about the homelessness housing crisis that is being experienced in Toronto, but across our country right now. So please help me welcome Ainsley. She's just getting mic'd up. We were not ready for that.
All right. Oh, that sounds like we're good.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. All right. Hi, everybody. So my name's Ainsley, and I was doing the math at the table. I have been here 8 years. So Susan actually was on the board. Susan was in my role very briefly, although I'm sure it felt like a long time for you. So I've been with Evangel Hall Mission for 8 years, and I'll talk a little bit about what it is that we do. But I also want to talk a bit about what, one of the big questions I keep getting is, why is there a homelessness crisis? What is happening with homelessness? And I'm going to be able to speak, I'll be using examples from Toronto, but I can assure you it's the same thing that's happening in Calgary, in Edmonton, in Vancouver, in Victoria, in Halifax. It's happening everywhere. But I'm just going to use some of the examples that we have for Evangel Hall. So this is a little bit about some of the programs that we offer. So one of the things we have is we have a drop-in center. So that is a daytime shelter for people who are homeless. So what happens when someone comes to EHM for the drop-in center? They come in, we're open every day. They can get a hot meal, they can get a shower, we have a towel service, they can do laundry. So we've got these nice big commercial washing machines so they can wash their laundry. They can, if they come in with, maybe they don't have weather appropriate clothing. So sometimes in the summer they're overdressed and are at risk of overheating. In the winter, of course, they're cold. Or if they come in soaking wet because it's pouring rain, we've got ample clothing that we can give to them every day. We also partner with a lot of health agencies. So we were doing a lot of vaccine clinics, not us, Toronto Public Health is coming in. So we were one of the first homeless vaccine shelter areas. So that was really, really powerful. So we do, and then the really nice thing that we have in the drop-in center is our spiritual care program. So we've got a minister, we've got some staffing, we have students who come through us through Knox College, and they do a lot of active listening and sitting and supporting. You know, sometimes it's sort of people coming in with big questions. Why did this happen to me? Why won't my parents talk to me? You know, some of these big questions. And sometimes it's to process grief. There's been a lot of death in the community, a lot of it to the opioid crisis. A lot of it is folks are just getting older and they're aging. Something that actually may surprise a lot of people is when you've been living in poverty and on the street, your body physically ages much faster. And so for the definition of seniors can be in some places 55 or as low as 50. So I'm 46. So to be considered a senior would be very shocking. But when you look at the physical and cognitive impact of spending a life on the streets, people start experiencing these symptoms of aging much earlier. So we're now looking at trying to figure out how do we support people who are considered physically or psychologically seniors. So we do that with a drop-in, so we're open 5 days a week. We have permanent housing. So that's something we're really proud of. So in the 90s, EHM built Portland Place, and then Portland Place became its own separate entity. Then we built Adelaide. So these are 2 residences. Adelaide has about 84 apartments. Portland Place is 46. And in the last, in 2021, we brought them back together. So we're one agency. And one of the interesting things about the housing is we offer more than just apartments. It's subsidized. The government gives us money. So someone only pays. So let's say their unit may rent for, you know, about $1,000 a month. They only pay $100. If they maybe have a job, because we have lots of folks who get kind of part-time jobs, or maybe they bike for Uber and they get a little bit of income here and there. If they get a job, they pay a little bit more. But if they lose their job or for some reason or another, they can't work for a while, they go back down. So they're only paying what they can afford. So for example, there's this great guy in the building who's a bike courier. So he can go for a number of months working, and then, you know, he'll have a bike accident or something and not work for a couple of months. And so we know that his income will go up and down, but he will never lose his housing, which a landlord obviously could not support, an open landlord. So that's something that we really provide. Something that's happening in our housing too is we have a lot of people who are aging, and we're really looking at how to support aging in place. So in some cases, we're seeing folks having a lot of falls. So we will get them connected to health services. We'll get permission to talk to their doctor. We can't provide those services, but we try and figure out what someone may need. And then we start making phone calls and to try and activate all these resources. So we know how to get them on wait lists for this type of assessment, or advocate for an occupational therapist to come into the home and figure out what kind of bars they need and things like that. We also do things like we're able to tell if someone's behavior maybe is a little unusual. Sometimes we can check in, and in some cases we find out that they haven't seen their physician and they've stopped taking their medication. That happened actually quite a bit through COVID. We had a lot of folks who had stopped seeing their physician. They didn't want to meet with them by Zoom. And then there were a lot of, we started making some phone calls. So we had one example of someone and their physician just said, oh, well, I haven't seen that person in a year and a half. I thought maybe they were just doing great. Meanwhile, we were able to say, actually, they're doing really poorly. They really need to be seeing you more frequently. And so we were able to get people back connected with their family physician. We've also, one of the really great programs that we introduced in the last couple of years with Portland Place is we call it our tenancy preservation program. And so even though we are a social housing landlord, we provide supports, we provide some subsidized housing. Tenants it is independent living, and they do have to adhere to certain rules under the provincial tenancy guidelines. There's not a lot of them, but things like you are not allowed to make noise that disturbs your neighbors. You have to allow us to come in and do pest control treatments. And you don't have to keep your unit spotless, but you have to keep your unit clean enough so that pest control can work and that you're not housing piles of garbage and things like that. And something that happened during COVID is a lot of folks who had, maybe they had friends, sometimes it was people they knew through their church, some people it was actually they had they were paying PSWs to come in, do some cleaning, take out their garbage. They lost all those supports and their garbage started to pile up, stuff started to pile up, the roaches started to reproduce. They didn't really know who to talk to. They didn't know how to advocate them for themselves. And so we hired someone whose job was just to work with some of these units that were really struggling with piles of garbage. We're talking like unwrapped packages of meat and things. That's how serious some of this was. And she's able to go in and work with the tenants to find out how did it get to this place and how did it get here in the first place? And then to try and figure out what resources they need. So that's how we found out one woman. So I was there. There were dozens of roaches on the ceiling. I actually have creepy crawlies on me right now when I think about it. But for her, she was apologetic. And she said, I'm so sorry. I'm trying to clean it up. Like, if you just give me another week. Of course, she was never going to be able to clean it up herself. So we said, don't worry about it. We are going to help you. And that's when we found out that the cleaner just stopped coming during COVID. And she didn't know that she could just call and ask them to come back. So we were able to figure it all out. So now she's living in a roach-free unit. It's clean. She's really happy. So these are some of the things that we try and do to make sure people don't just have four walls, that they have a quality of life. There's a dental clinic in our basement. We have a partnership with a dental hygiene school. So they run all of their students. Their students do cleaning and oral health education. They also do a lot of health screening. So there are certain things like they have flagged someone's blood pressure is emergency room level critical. So there's lots of times where they'll say, you know what? Your dental care is lower on your priority. We need to get you to the ER, or, we'll do the care today, but you really have to see your doctor. Do you have one? Can we help you get one? So the dental clinic is a really powerful health screening tool. And then the last program I'm just going to talk to you a little bit is our financial trusteeship. That is I'm not supposed to have favorites, but this is my favorite program. So folks who volunteer, they sign up, it's voluntary. They get their source of income, whether it's from a government or wherever they get their money from, deposited into our bank accounts, and we pay their bills. So we know that every month their rent is paid with their money. And then we talk to them, we can make sure their cell phone is paid. So we know they will never lose their phone and never lose their housing because they just didn't pay their bills. Then we'll work out how much money do you want every week? And in some cases, they just say split it by 4. And then at the end of the month, at least they know they have money to buy food. And then their paychecks or their income starts over. But we know that they can get to the end of the month with enough to buy food. For some, they use as an opportunity to try and save money because they want to buy some presents for their kids at Christmas. We had one example of a woman who, she spent her whole life in poverty. I think she was in her 60s. And her mother passed away, and she got a, big for her, many thousands of dollars of an insurance. What do you pay out? Thank you, insurance policy. Thank you. And she was so overwhelmed because she had never had this much money. She was so terrified of spending it. She was also at risk of being targeted by other people to try and, can you lend me some money? Can you pay for this? Can you pay for that? So we're able to help her. We ask her, what do you want to do with your money? And so if she starts saying, I need another $500 to give to my friend, that's where we're able to say, do you really want to give that money to your friend? Do you have to give it to your friend? And talk them through. And then we find out that, in fact, she was actually being bullied by her friend. So that's where we're able to try and protect the money that folks have. So these are some really great programs. Layered through all of this is our spiritual care. And I think I talked a little bit about that. I don't see a thing on here, but the spiritual care is something that's really throughout our whole building. And we really come at it from a trauma-informed place. And we've had some really interesting conversations. So for example, we've got a minister, Reverend Dale, and there was a big question about should he or should he not wear a collar? And, you know, there's a lot of staff. It was really interesting, new grads out of social services programs. And they said, well, you know, we're worried that the collar may feel intimidating or possibly oppressive to some people who've been hurt by the church. And so Dale said, well, why don't we ask clients? Let's see what they want. And because he said, I certainly don't want to make anybody feel uncomfortable. And then he started talking to clients and they all said, no, you're the minister, you got to wear your collar, you know, and it actually really created a sense of trust. And it was really interesting because one day someone came in and he was obviously quite activated by the collar. He had experienced direct harm from a church as a youth. And he came in and he was screaming and yelling at Reverend Dale. And then he left and we said, you know, we understand that this is your history, but would you mind just coming back and having a conversation with Dale? And so he did. And he and Dale had a really good conversation. And he actually said, you know what, I'm really sorry. I understand you're not the person who hurt me, but this is my experience. And he and Dale had this really healing, powerful conversation. And, you know, certainly that one conversation didn't make up for the harms that had happened, but you know, that's sort of the beauty of, you know, we really work with folks with where they're at. And it's just been a very, very powerful program. I also just want to talk a little bit about the housing continuum, because when we talk about housing, there's all sorts of ways we can talk about it. So the way, sort of the one way, this is from the CMHC, is you can move from one side, which is your homelessness, actively living on the street. Sometimes it's called living rough. You've got your emergency shelters, which is 24-hour shelters. Then you have transitional housing. Transitional housing usually was designed where you're supposed to, the intent is you live for 1 year. And the idea is you live here, you learn life skills, you build some, you know, you stabilize your life, and then you can move maybe into social housing or maybe into some affordable home rental housing. And that was actually how EHM, our residence, one of our residences was built, was intended to be transitional. And so we built very small units, 220 square feet, because we never really expected anyone to live there that long. We thought they'd come, we'd stabilize them, and then they could go move somewhere that's a little bit more comfortable. But the reality is with the homeless crisis, there is nowhere for anyone to go. And so there is no real transitional housing, certainly in Toronto anymore. We use it, but it doesn't really mean anything. Social housing, that's sort of what I described. That's housing where we have, there's subsidies, so you only pay a portion of your rent. The range of supports is quite broad. We provide more advocacy and referral, but you can also get social housing that has very intensive support. So they can actually provide housekeepers and they actually can make meals and they have a cafeteria where you can eat. So there's a big range within the concept of social housing. Affordable rental housing. This is the big thing is what is affordable anymore in Toronto, Vancouver, Calgary. It's you know, and even how to even define affordable is very controversial. And then affordable home ownership, again, that seems to be pretty out of completely. It's almost like you've taken this off the grid completely. But that's where you know, churches are actually looking at partnerships with things like Housing for Humanity or Options for Homes, where there is a way for folks to actually buy into a condo in a way that they can actually own that home. So there's lots of different things that we're trying to think through. And then the market rental housing, that's landlords get to set their rental rates at anything they want. However it's provincially regulated. And that's one of the challenges, is that we have lost so much housing on this end that people on that end get stuck. So one of the things that's happening with the Adelaide residents and Portland Place is we have lots of folks who have stabilized. New Canadians, actually, we have a lot of refugees are in the shelter system. What's really interesting is a lot of them can come in. It takes about 6 months they kind of stabilize things, learn English, get a job, start to build a network or community, and then they actually could move into, if there was affordable housing, they could move out and live on their own and not need a lot of EHM services. But the problem is there's nowhere for people who are more independent to move to. So they're all at EHM, and that's something that we're trying to do, is how can we find ways to get folks who are independent and don't need our level of support moved out into the community so that we can get more folks out of the shelter. So what I just described is called housing flow. So we want to be able to constantly be moving people into permanent housing, pull folks out of the shelter, but right now the entire system is stuck. And so that's one of the reasons why the emergency shelters are blowing up. So these are old numbers, and I can tell you but it paints a little bit of a picture. So this is in Ontario. If you're on Ontario Works, this is how much you are given. So if you are a single person with 2 children, you are given $700 a month for rent. So I don't think I need to talk about how challenging that could be if you are trying to find a place in Toronto. And then we're also looking at what's happening with the market is rooming houses and deeply affordable units are being lost. And then anyone who has a market unit is increasing. So the rates that individuals are getting from government it was never close to what they could afford. And now the gap is so much bigger. So what is leading to homelessness? So the 3 sort of biggest challenges, most common challenges, are someone's experienced trauma. And it sounds like from what you've been talking, sounds like you guys have conversations about intergenerational trauma and mental health issues. We're seeing a lot more complex mental health issues where, someone has an addiction and they have trauma and they have schizophrenia. So we're seeing people with 2, 3, 4 compounding issues all together, and it is really difficult to figure out where do you start, how do you start treatment, how do they work together? And at the end of the day, we're very firmly supportive of a housing first model. You cannot help anybody through any of these things unless they have somewhere to live that is safe. And that's sort of one of the big challenges that we're facing. So this was from a study. So this is just sort of give you a bit example. So 85% of people who are homeless are in distress. Sexual, physical, and other types of abuse were things that led to them becoming homeless. 63%. Shelters are becoming more violent, unfortunately. Women are really experiencing some of the stuff at much higher rates than men. So this is just a little bit of a snapshot of what sort of some of the causes behind homelessness, in addition to the lack of housing. I'm wondering if there's a way to see here. So when we also did a summary in between 2020 and 2021, what did tenant support workers do? So 1,343 supportive conversations. So these are just conversations. How are you doing? What's going on? Oh, your dog is limping. Have you been able to get care for your dog? Things like that. We do a lot of one-on-one tenant meetings. One of the things that can be very challenging is your income, if you are on income disability, drops between the ages of 64 and 65. So when you switch programs due to your age, you actually get less money. You do qualify for some other programs, but there are a lot of people who don't know this and struggle with that change. So we really spend a lot of time helping them understand what's coming, helping them plan. Lots of meetings to build life skills. There are lots of folks who come and are really angry at their neighbors for playing TV too loud. So we really try and teach them some, conflict resolution and healthy ways to have conversations with your neighbors. Late rent payments. So that's another thing is from time to time, people don't pay their rent, or maybe, and we really, the second someone doesn't pay their rent, we jump in The first question is why? Is there a mental health issue? Are you in crisis? Is there some reason you're not paying your rent? So we want to make sure that no one ever falls behind on the rent. We want to jump in really quickly and find out what's happening. So these are two stories. So one, we had an individual who hoarding can happen. Hoarding can happen from lots of different reasons. Sometimes it's anxiety. There's another one example is one woman inherited all of her mom's belongings and she had only a 200 square foot apartment. And so she actually had to climb over furniture to get into her bathroom just to use the toilet. So she hadn't really told anybody this had happened. She just kind of put it all in and she just didn't have the capacity to think through. I mean, she was dealing with the death of her mother. So this is where actually Dale did a visit, and Reverend Dale went up and he looked at her room and he had a conversation with her, and he was able to sit down. Now, if the unit was without question a fire code violation, if the fire department had ever come, or if there had been an accident and EMS had tried to come, she would have been fined, we would have been fined. So he was able to sit down and try and understand how this happens. And then so the issue was grief. So he was able to work with her to help her think through, all right, well, let's figure out which items are meaningful that you want to keep and what are items that we can let go. And it took a number of months, but he got her unit back to a state. And again, it was just a lot of talking through grief and emotion. And that's sort of the power of our spiritual care program. You know, we could have come in and, you know, we could have said, you have 30 days to get rid of your stuff. Good luck. But we also know that she wouldn't have done it. She would have been anxious. She would have been miserable. It wouldn't have happened. And it would have just been high conflict. So that's where we try and understand how this happened in the first place and how to support them through it. Another example is that we had a tenant who when you normally see him, really sweet, gentle, soft-spoken. You would never, ever think that he is someone who is capable of, you know, high levels of aggression or threats. All of a sudden, he just, for lack of a better word, he just changed. It was just like that. He was angry. He was paranoid. He became abusive towards staff. And he's a really good example of someone who said, this doesn't make sense. And we finally got him to give us permission after a couple of weeks to talk to his doctor. And that's when his doctor said, he's canceled all of his appointments and I'm really worried about him. And that's when we were able to figure out, okay, who do we know who knows him? Who could sort of talk some sense and get him to go back to the doctor? And that's an example of where we were able to get him to the doctor, and the doctor got him back, adjusted his medication. I'm not exactly sure what happened. But that was a really great example of, you know, well, first of all, someone could have gotten hurt, including him. But because we were watching and paying attention and asking questions, we were able to get him the help he needed. We also could have gone after him to try to evict him, which I think is what a lot of, you know, a landlord, certainly that's what a landlord, a regular landlord would do. But we have the skills and training to help get people back to where they need to be. And yeah, and he's been back to himself for the last year and a half. Oh yes, this is just to visualize how this works. So a day drop-in, this is where our day drop-in fits in terms of the housing community, but these are examples of all the different types of shelters. This is where our social housing fits in, and this is where most cities need a lot more of this. Again, because we're not just talking about folks who don't have income, we're talking about folks who don't have income and they need help. They need someone to advocate for them. They need someone to call their doctor, to call ODSP, to call a PSW company that stopped coming. And we definitely need more social housing. And one of the things that when we talk about affordable housing in, if you hear some announcements from the the federal government, this is the money that CMHC is giving to anyone who wants to build, whether it's a private developer or whether it's a church that's trying to build more housing on their land. Generally, what they're trying to do is using financial incentives to make sure that 30% of every new building project has affordable housing. Affordable, though, just to be blunt, is affordable maybe to the middle class. We're not talking folks who are low income, but it's still needed. And I see that someone brought in From the Ashes. That is a fantastic book. That is a really beautiful, it gives a great example of how someone ends up. It talks about intergenerational trauma, and it really highlights how someone just ends up overwhelmed on the street using drugs. And he starts right off, "This is what happened to me as a kid." And you could just really see it just builds a level of empathy and understanding for how someone got here, because we all are a paycheck or two away, or major life incident, major illness, major accident away from poverty. And I think that really sort of hits home. So a couple of ways that I know this was a little bit of a downer, but this is what we are doing. So food drives, I know that you guys, Armor Heights has been incredibly supportive in so many different ways. And it's really nice. I recognize a number of faces from the Christmas party, and I think that's underway and being planned. I'm really excited about that. We're definitely looking at our food. Food costs have skyrocketed. EHM is really hurting in terms of having to buy food. The other thing is we have been inundated with client demand that we have never seen before. So we're seeing a number of drop-ins in the center in the area have closed. So we see way more clients needing food. New Canadians and refugees, we have never seen them in the numbers we've seen them. So the amount of food that we're giving out every day is really big. So we're always looking for people to do food drives. Group cooking, again, everyone talks about the Christmas party that you guys organize all year long. Clothing, we are always accepting clothing drives. Volunteering, also you guys are our #1 team for the run, and we love seeing your photos and we love seeing the walk, and we're trying to use you as a model to get other churches to help do things like that. And we also, accept gifts of appreciated shares. People like that come tax time. So I did talk for quite a bit longer than I meant to, but I do want to open up for questions. Yes.
I read the other day that PEI has adopted UBI on a for the province, and that would solve a lot of your housing issues. It would be a lovely thing. UBI, Universal Basic Income. So nobody makes less than like $25,000 in PEI. Now there's all kinds of regulations and stipulations. If you earn money, then you pay back 50 cents on the dollar that you get from the government, but everybody's guaranteed that money. That's happening in PEI for 5 years, and that's a trial run. But it's so badly needed here in Toronto. I can't see us not winding up, or at least pushing up for our governments to follow suit.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's something that study after study has come out to say that that the UBI does lead to a net increase in health, decrease in use of health services, and it's far more cost effective. Effectively, you're front ending, and where you're seeing the savings is on all of your use of municipal surface, EMS, police, emergency room departments, and of course people are happier because they have a home and they have food. Toronto is really struggling again, so there's the income piece, but then there's just physically there is not enough housing. So that's one of the things that EHM is doing, is really encouraging congregations that are sitting on big pieces of land, or congregations that are trying to reimagine their future. Can you reimagine a future that involves affordable and deeply affordable supportive housing in your redevelopment plan? So these are some of the things we're encouraging congregations to think about, because some congregations are shrinking and are looking at closing or merging or scaling down, and partnerships and things like that. So.
How many clients you serve in a year?
It's hard to say how much we serve in a year. We used to do about 170 a day in the drop-in, but now we're pushing 250 a day. And that's, during COVID, it made a lot of sense when we saw a big increase because churches stopped their community meals, any volunteer group. So during COVID, it was only the agencies that stayed open. And I kind of thought, oh, well, once COVID ends, we'll go back down to our numbers, but they're going up drastically, especially it's just every month they keep going up. So we're really trying to figure out how to close this gap.
Hi, thank you. It was very informative. We all know people living through this, and it's this church has been supportive of me as I have been trying to be supportive of people I know. Just regarding like asking churches to open their doors. I mean, many churches, I was at a downtown church for 12 years, are turning part of their land into daycares to make ends meet. It's nice Armor Heights hasn't had to do that, but maybe we do have rental income from like dance program or whatever. And so, I mean, asking churches to see if they can accommodate in some ways might be a good idea. And I just also want to say the work you do is important. I have no idea how many people you cannot serve, but I'm sure it's very difficult to turn your doors to people who, can't receive your services because I'm sure it's highly needed. And I wonder where those people go. Yeah,
it has been hard. Some drop-ins have said we are capping it at this many meals and just saying, sorry, we don't have anything left. That is an extremely difficult thing to ask staff and volunteers to do. So we've been using that as our last resort. One thing we're looking at is because we at some point we just can't make that many meals. So one of the things that we're looking at is seeing if churches would be willing to supply non-perishable takeaway bags with like protein bars and granola bars and cheese and crackers and things, so that if we hit a day where we don't have enough food, at least we can give someone a paper bag with something that they can take with them that we can sort of keep in storage. So these are some of the ideas, but asking a staff member or a volunteer to say, no, we don't have any food is extremely traumatic. So we're trying to make that kind of our last resort.
Can we just put on gallery? That way we'll see the.
Oh, yeah.
It's okay.
I was just going to say, if Ainsley, if you can potentially stop the share, that would be great. Yeah, then we'll get a fuller view. And also, I think we do have some questions from our online folks. If you can make some space, but it looks like Harris may be directing the microphone to someone who's in person right now.
Just give us a second. We'll get to the questions on.
Thank you very much for this very informative presentation. My question, maybe you might have said it at the beginning, but I missed it. I'm just wondering, what is the average wait time for affordable housing? And if at all, do you guys prioritize people with disabilities?
Great questions.
Yeah.
There are some numbers that come out that say, 4 to 5 years, 10 to 14 years. It's years. So what we do is we have partnerships with shelters. And so we've got 4 partnerships. And then what we do is when we have a new unit, we sort of go through the list and we say, okay, this is the size of the unit. We also want to make sure that the people moving in are going to be successful because so for example, if there's a floor with lots of women and children, we don't want to put someone who is really actively struggling with addiction and maybe have a history of violence. That would just be a bad fit. So that's why we work with some of the shelters and we say, okay, this is the makeup of the floor. And then they say, okay, I've got someone that I think would be a good fit. And then they come and check the unit and see if they want to take it. But to say how long those folks have been on, it's probably been years and years and years, multiple years. Yeah. You asked another question.
Prioritize people with
yes.
disabilities, yeah.
The challenge that we have, and that's a really important question, that's what we're trying to do, is that when the units were built, even though it was built in the 2000s, most of the units are not wheelchair accessible. It's really difficult. And so that's one of the things we're looking at as people are aging, they've got more mobility devices and these units aren't set up that way. So that's something that we're trying to plan for. And if ever we were part of a project to build housing again, we would very much want to make sure that everything is physically accessible. Generally, new builds are doing that. But yes, that's something that's been very difficult for us. And when we do have a unit that is bigger, we do try and prioritize to make sure that someone, like I think I mentioned the story about the gentleman who had experience with violence. We're in the process of trying to move him. So he's in a motorized chair and we're trying to move him into a unit that is bigger because of that. But right now he's trying to get his chair into a 200 square foot house. So yeah, it's very challenging.
Thank you. Last question for me. What is the difference between your social housing program and the affordable housing?
So affordable housing, we have all of our housing that we have right now is subsidized. So you only pay a portion of your rent. And then we have support. So we don't provide PSWs, we don't provide meal, we don't provide nursing or on-site medical care. But what we do is we will help build a plan for you so that if you need these things, we will help make sure that you can qualify. We'll help you fill out the paperwork. You know, we will, you know, because one of the challenges is that there's a lot of turnover in the sector. So if someone's government worker changes 3 times in a year, they don't know who to call and they don't have someone who will come to bat for them. So we'll go to bat for them and we'll make sure that they have access to supports. Other types of housing in the city do have more intensive supports. That's just not something we do right now.
Okay. Thank you for the amazing work you do. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much.
We'll get to the online folks in one sec, but Patty had her hand up.
Thank you for the presentation. It was very interesting and really good to hear. I wondered, and it was after Irene was asking the question, if you have partnerships with the food bank systems and how that works. And secondly, do you have any partnerships with any corporate partnerships around food or volunteer? I know obviously the partnerships with churches and within the faith-based world, but just wondered about your links with the and is that sufficient now? And what's that like? I know the crisis in food banks as well.
You just asked 3 really good questions. I'll try to make it fast. So the first question is, so the way we get our food to make and serve is we start with what we're given through food rescue programs like Second Harvest and the food bank. So they have programs where they send flats of food to drop-in centers like ours. So we do get a big chunk of our food that way. We don't know what we get. It shows up on Monday or it shows up on Thursday. It could be cabbages. It could be, our cook had to go in and like Google a vegetable because he'd never seen it and hadn't cooked it before. And he used to be vegetarian. So actually he can do amazing stuff with what comes in. And then anything else we supplement, but you know, protein, like we don't get donations of meat. So anything that's protein, you know, we also go through a lot of coffee, a lot of powdered milk, a lot of tea, a lot of sugar. So that kind of stuff we do more and more, we're having to buy on our own and supplement. First question. Second question was corporate partnerships. A lot of corporations that used to fund like social service agencies through their marketing departments because they would like to have their name on things, golf sponsorships, things like that. They've really pulled back and instead they've taken those funds and associated them with their employee engagement programs. So it's been really good in that they get employees to make choices about where their money goes, which is kind of cool. But usually that money also comes with volunteering expectations. And one of the challenges we face is that we're so small. And so we can't really give volunteer experience for a company with 25 to 50 people. It's much smaller. So it's very difficult for us to access. And also I've been personally pretty disappointed with the amount of money that they pay. it's, oh yeah, we're going to give you a big donation. And when I look at what they gave, it was, that was a lot of work to bring in and give a really good experience to those volunteers. And it can be very challenging for us because we are small in that way. Churches, I've been talking to ministers and asking, I've actually been using you guys as a role model because you guys are very vibrant and you've got a really vibrant volunteer community and you're kind of growing in a way that not all churches are. And what I've been hearing from a lot of them is we want more volunteer opportunities. That's what younger people want to do. They want to do service. So we've been trying to create those opportunities. But it's just for reasons I'm not yet clear. No one's signing up for them yet. So I don't know if they don't know. I don't know if it's because people don't want to come downtown. We're not really clear, but we haven't been getting the return in volunteers that we've been kind of hoping for. Yeah.
Online folks.
Yes, Heather, go for it. You're already unmuted and ready to go.
Okay. Well, my name is Heather and I'm from Calgary, and you have relieved my concern. I have a friend who's extremely mentally ill, and now I see all these programs. I'm sure they have the equivalent here in Calgary. It certainly has. Thank you so much for all this information and for doing this kind of work. A very minor question: do you actually help them with their taxes? Because I can't really get too much response from my friend. She's just really bad at the moment. So thank you.
Yes. So the answer is yes. Actually, a lot of agencies, so there would absolutely be agencies in your community in Calgary that would do this. So there is a program where volunteers who have the skill set to complete forms usually will come to, so we've got one gentleman who does tax returns for everybody in the spring, but a lot of agencies will have that. So, and what's happened is it used to be that you could qualify for all of these government programs, even if you didn't file your taxes. They changed that. So for example, we were helping one individual do 10 years worth of taxes. And he the bike courier, I told him, so he had tons of income coming and going. I'll tell you, he had no idea where any of his money was or what he made or when. And anyway, trying to do 10 years worth of his taxes. But we got it done, and he got a huge chunk of tax return money. And so that's, in the end, it worked out. But yes, we absolutely do. And now you have to, because governments at all levels are now expecting it. Whereas 3 years ago, they didn't really pay attention if you made under a certain amount.
Thank you.
Thanks. Erin?
Yes, I have a question, and also I want to direct people's attention. First of all, this presentation has been incredibly informative, and I feel like all of us our next question is always, what can we do to help support? So if everybody looks to Ainsley's left, or probably most of the people's right, on the bulletin board, other direction, yes. Ainsley pointed in the right direction. There's some posters that have details about EHM is appealing for baked goods to provide to residents, and perhaps in the drop-in center, there's lists of the type of clothing that they're looking for their clothing drive, as well as the food. So if those are a couple of things you want to check out, that would be great after the presentation. We'll also include them in our e-blast, some of those posters, so that you can have a look at home, maybe in a future e-blast coming up. And also, we just had Black Friday, and there's going to be Cyber Monday. And I know that Giving Tuesday is coming up. And I was thinking, as somebody who's really conscious of environmental concerns and, the impact of our planet, buying gifts, are there opportunities for us to give to EHM as a donation that we can do in honor of someone else?
Oh,
Okay.
is that a question? Yes. Yes.
It is a question.
We know the answer.
I guess
I think it was a pretty loaded question, but I just wanted to direct some attention to that.
Yeah. Yeah, and some of the things that we've been trying to think about is, like we have been talking to a number of churches, said, we really want volunteer opportunities, but a lot of it's hard. I mean, I ride a bike, but the few times that I have to drive a car downtown is horrible. But that's something where kids can get together and bake a whole bunch of cookies and put them in little baggies, or cupcakes. I know that I've done a Valentine's. I've gotten 5 or 6 families. Everyone cooks a dozen cupcakes and gives them to me, and I bring them all in. So there's lots of things that kids can do. We're also, if you bake lemon squares, and I promise this is not just because I want to eat some lemon squares. But if you are a baker, that's something we love to have things in our freezer so that when it's a tenant's birthday, we can pull it out. Or when we have a puzzle day where we've got coffee and puzzles, it's just really nice to have some baked goods. It tastes better than Timbits, and people really, it feels better. Just feels like you're doing something fun. Rather than just having a box of donuts that was sort of tossed in. So anyway, these are little things that people can do that really mean a lot. They're very powerful, very, very powerful for us.
So I'm aware that you've been on your feet and talking for about an hour now. And I don't know, is there any other question from online folks before we?
I don't think so, but I would like to highlight that Kathy has said, thank you for this great informative presentation, and thank you for the work that you do at EHM. So that seems like a beautiful way to kind of wrap things up.
And I do want to add, and I don't remember if you mentioned it, Rebecca, but just for folks to know, elders know this, but Armor Heights has been, besides all the other ways, donating significant amounts of money to EHM every year, and Portland Place as well. And now that they've joined, so it's about $23,000 a year. And that has been going on for the last couple of years. It's something we do with the resources we have. And I mean, EHM is not the only one, but one of our significant kind of directions for some of this. And certainly next year at our annual meeting, part of the goal is to renew our outreach reflection and see where the needs are and how we can best direct that. Because of course you need money as much as you need all these other ways as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just want to close by saying thank you. Thank you for, the hundreds of hours that go into the dinners and the clothing drives and the food drives and everything you guys have done, and to raise the money and the money that we were able to use to make this happen. And I also want to say thank you to Rebecca, who is one of our board members and has been a really big support and guide, and it just makes my life easier. And I just want to say thank you so much. And I also just want to say personally, that was a fantastic service. I really, really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed it.
That's great. Thank you,
Yeah,
Ainsley. We just have a small token of our appreciation for you
Oh,
coming today.
thank you so much.
And thank you for joining us online and in person, and for all of your wonderful questions. And as we've said a number of times now, there are so many ways that we do give to EHM. There's so many more ways you can. Also direct your attention to the other bulletin board that still has open spots if you haven't signed up to help with the dinner on December 7th. So if you are interested in cooking anything, of course, some of it is just buying things too. If you just want to go to the store and buy some pre-wrapped chocolates, we need those too, because we give those as little special treats to the residents who join us. So there are ways you can participate if you would like cooking and baking, and there are ways you can participate if you like to just go to the store and pick something up that's very simple. But it all, of course, it makes a huge difference to these residents to be able to have a special party that they get to participate in, and volunteering, of course, too. There's lots of opportunities to come and help serve that meal as well. And so we'll continue to keep you apprised of all the things that we are doing to help support EHM. As a board member, I always encourage you to donate yourselves as well. If you want to know more about how to do that, you can speak with me. But overall, it's just great to have you here to help educate ourselves about what is going on, particularly in our city, but across the country as well, and ways that we can continue to help
help these vulnerable people who are stuck in a lot of ways, and the ways that EHM is helping to bring them out of that in whatever ways they can. So again, thank you, Ainsley.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.
And I will just close off for our online community. Thank you so much for joining us and participating in our Lunch and Learn. And we will also, if you're watching this at another time because you're watching the recording, we're so glad that you participated in that way too. And we look forward to future opportunities to share in this way. Thanks everyone, and enjoy your afternoon or wherever you may be watching this.